public meeting 3A. This is a formal public meeting to consider zoning bylaw amendment Z1711 in 8 Sage 10 Development Inc. for 257 to 263 Hemlock Street. Any persons who want further notices of application, including the passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate register in the binder located on the desk at the rear of council chambers. If there's more than one binder, please make sure you're signing the correct one. Will the clerk please advise council of the method used to give notice of the meeting and the dates notice was given?
Notice was advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle on November 2nd, 2017, and mailed or emailed on October 31st, 2017, to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property, to public agencies, to all persons who signed in or spoke at the informal public meeting held on June 19th, 2017, and to all persons who requested further notice.
Thank you. The planner will now provide a brief overview of the application. Welcome, John.
Good evening, members of council, ladies and gentlemen. As mentioned, this is the formal public meeting for 257 to 263 Hemlock Street zoning bylaw amendment Z17-11. The subject property, referred to as Sage 10, is at the intersection of Hemlock and Balsam Streets, directly north of Sage 6 and Sage 8 developments. To the east is the Block development and the St. Michael's Catholic Church, as well as the Lazarides School of Business. Properties north and west of Sage 10 are primarily single detached dwellings. Directly south of the property is a pedestrian path that connects Hemlock and Albert Streets. These lands were previously secured through Sage developments. Sage 10 is located within short walking distance to two universities, Wilfrid Laurier to the southeast and University of Waterloo to the west. Waterloo Park and two LRT stations are also within appropriate walking distances. The subject properties are currently each developed with single detached residential dwellings. Sage 10 is located within the Northdale neighborhood and is subject to special policies and regulations. The official plan permits a maximum density of 250 bedrooms per hectare, with potential increase of up to 600 bedrooms per hectare through a bonusing agreement. The zoning bylaw sets a maximum height of 20 meters, in keeping with the six-story limit of the official plan. This section of Hemlock Street is considered neighborhood frontage, which does not require ground floor commercial uses. The proposed amendments are to permit 75 additional bedrooms through a Section 37 bonusing agreement. The total density will be 508 bedrooms per hectare. Also to increase the height of the overall building from 20 to 21.8 meters, still within 6 stories. And finally, to lift the holding provision. The design of the building has been revised since the original submission. The new design has more variation in the massing along the front of the building, new terraces, and reduced number of bedrooms from 151 to 147. The proposed height increase from 20 to 21.8 as requested by staff will enhance the ground floor as a podium of the building. The ground floor units will be residential, not commercial, and will have direct private access to the street. The site plan includes landscape buffers around the perimeter of the property, 38 parking spaces, some of which are under the building, 40 indoor and outdoor bicycle storage spaces, and a single driveway for ingress and egress. The pedestrian pathway on the right of the image is not on the subject property, but provides an important connection westward to Albert Street. The ground floor of the building will have 11 residential units, as well as amenity rooms, bike storage, and a gym. In total, there will be 137 units in a range of unit sizes, including a studio unit, 1 and 2 bedroom units, for a total of 147 bedrooms. The Section 37 bonusing provisions, staff have agreed with the acceptance of $10,000 for each additional bedroom. That's for each 75 bedroom in addition to what the zoning currently permits. The total amount will be $750,000. This is proposed to be divided with $85,000 for 3 electric vehicle charging stations at city facilities, $500,000 for a new affordable housing grant program administered by council, and $165,000 for expansion of the Waterloo Memorial Recreation Complex. Further details are outlined in the staff report. Staff are noting two friendly amendments or requesting that these amendments be made as proposed as the, let me start this slide again. Two friendly amendments are proposed based on recent considerations of the development. Firstly, the details of the affordable housing grant have not been finalized as we await further information from the province around inclusionary zoning. Given the timing of these changes, Council could consider redirecting these funds to other eligible bonusing projects if the funds aren't used within a period of, say, about 5 years, up to decision of Council. Secondly, the final building height will be 21.8 meters, not 21.5 meters as noted in the staff report. This is a minor increase to the overall building height, which really won't see a significant change. In conclusion, staff recommend that Council approve zoning bylaw amendment Z1711 for 257 to 263 Hemlock Street in accordance with Section 7 of IPPW 2017-064. The project will further activate Hemlock Street through redevelopment of a transit and pedestrian-oriented development which is located near pedestrian pathways and within 800 meters of 2 LRT stations. Staff have presented several options for where funds generated through the Section 37 bonusing can be directed. However, Council is welcome to decide which initiatives are more appropriate at this time and could consider other directions for those funds. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Any questions for staff? Councillor Henry?
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski. John, I think there was one question I remember sending you in advance, but I don't recall that we discussed a reply, and that was on street tree preservation in front of the property. Since I do see we actually, unusually for Northdale, have street trees abutting the private lands on these. Just wondering what our practice is in terms of protecting those through development.
I'll have to look into through the construction process of that. During construction, all works that are occurring would be on the subject property, but street trees and all the boulevard space would be maintained during construction, is my understanding.
Yeah, well, and that's just something I would look. I see Mr. Rapp.
Certainly, through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Henry, through the road occupancy permit process and site plan, we would try and we will request some form of hoarding as well. There's no guarantee, but we will ask for the hoarding around the trees to try and help promote their preservation as well as allowing access to the site.
I appreciate that. So that was the only detail that we didn't get back and forth on before tonight.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Durrell, please.
Thanks. I'm trying to think back to the informal hearing and what the bonusing agreement was. Were we aware of? Was it Waterloo Park? Was this the one that there was going to be money to Waterloo Park, or was that a different?
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Durrell. I wasn't part of the informal meeting, and I've taken on this project later in the stage, and I believe there was a number of discussions, including Waterloo Park, but this is where the funding is being settled at this stage.
Okay.
Further questions of staff? Seeing none, thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
I will now ask any registered delegations to come forward. I have registered David Galbraith, IBI Group.
Good evening, Mayor Jaworski and members of council. My name is Dave Galbraith. I'm a planner with IBI Group in Waterloo. I'm here tonight with Jamie Douglas from my office, who's an architect, and Daryl Furston of Innate Developments. Thanks to, just as we begin, thanks to the City of Waterloo staff, including BB Khan, Trevor Hawkins, who's no longer with the city, and John for taking over the file recently for their work on the project and their very helpful recommendations with regards to the design. So for the presentation tonight, I'm going to try to breeze through this because a lot of this is repeated over what John had just mentioned to you. But I'll give a brief overview of the property, a description of the revised development concept, details of the zoning bylaw amendment application and Section 37 application, some rationale for the density bonusing request, and then just open it up for some questions. And then I'll be joined by Daryl, who has some comments to add to the discussion as well. As John mentioned, there's the existing property features 4 single detached residences, which are shown on the images on the screen. The entire site is designated low-density residential and zoned NMU6. I note that the official plan does allow for density bonusing here, up to a maximum density of 600 bedrooms per hectare, where the as-of-right density is 250 bedrooms per hectare, as John had noted. The subject property is also identified as being within a neighborhood frontage area. So here is an image showing the location of the site. I can't see the mouse on. There we go. So it's 257 to 263 Hemlock Street, across the street from the 275 Larch Street, or the block. Abutting Sage 8 to the west, Sage 6 to the south, and Ivy 2 and 3 up on the northern portions of Hemlock that are currently being developed as well. I note that Sage 8 and 275 Larch Street have both been recipients of additional density through Section 37 agreements. So I'll just focus on the image here. Since the informal public meeting, the design of the building has come a long way. As you'll see on the revised development concept, there's now much more transparency into the building, much more articulation. You have inset balconies, some prominent corners on the tower of the building, and articulation in the middle part of the building. Pursuant to city staff and site plan review committee comments, there's also a taller ground floor of the building, which will be 4.5 meters. Although right now all ground floor units are proposed to be residential, this will allow for flexibility in the future in the event that there's ever a need for additional shops and stores in Northdale, consistent with the overall vision for the neighborhood. Here's a copy of the site plan. John has gone through it, so I'll just skip over this slide here. So the revised development concept, it's a 6-story, 137-unit residential building, featuring a total of 147 buildings. The building will feature amenity spaces, including a gym, rooftop terrace, lounge, and other amenity spaces. There will be indoor and outdoor bike storage on the property, 40 in total, with most of those being indoor secure spaces, and 38 car parking spaces. I note that despite the increase in density requested for the site, the development still conforms to the parking standards that would be required for this higher density development, being the 0.25 spaces per bedroom standard. As I'd mentioned, the development now features a taller ground floor of 4.5 meters and an enhanced architectural design from what was seen by council earlier this year at the informal public meeting. Here's an overview of the revised density bonusing and zoning bylaw amendment request. The applicant's requesting 75 additional bedrooms through the Section 37 agreement, which will result in an overall density of 507, might be 508, John, I'm not sure, somewhere in that range, bedrooms per hectare, where the official plan allows for the 600 bedrooms per hectare. In exchange for this, the applicant's proposing $10,000 financial contribution to the City of Waterloo. Councillor Durrell, to your question before, there was some discussion earlier on about the contribution potentially going to the Festival Area Fund at the city, but it was also as city staff and council would best see it directed through this process. So a total contribution of $750,000 is proposed in exchange for the additional bedrooms, which is convenient because it's 75 times 10,000, which makes remembering the number easier for me. And then in addition to that, pursuant to site plan comments, we are requesting, or the applicant's requesting a building height of 21.8 meters, which is still 6 stories permitted by the zoning bylaw and the official plan. And this is in response to comments received by city staff requesting that the base of the building be a little taller, as I had mentioned before. So I brushed over some of this previously, but this slide summarizes some of the rationale for the density bonusing. As I'd mentioned previously, the official plan contemplates the use of density bonusing within the city of Waterloo and within the Northdale area. This is an optional tool that was approved by the city through the approval of its official plan, and that 600 bedroom per hectare standard was endorsed for the Northdale neighborhood. The building, as you see, it features a very high standard of design that's been refined through work with city staff. The financial contribution is in line with recent financial contributions that have been accepted by the City of Waterloo. And then with regard to the additional height, the taller ground floor will allow for the conversion of the units in the future. So thank you for your time. I'll now ask Daryl if you have any comments. Oh yeah, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions for the delegate, for Dave? Seeing none, thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome, Daryl.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski and esteemed members of council. Thank you for seeing our development proposal. I think we discussed the details in our last informal public meeting. I just wanted to see if you had any questions for me about the development. Happy to answer them.
Thank you. I see Councillor Henry does.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Daryl, for coming up. It means that I didn't instead pepper David. But one question I had for you, certainly the density bonus here relative to the as-of-right size is not insignificant here. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the design concept, because as I understand it, the design concept in part is driving part of the significant bonus request above the base.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, absolutely. Although the density bonusing is significant, the size of the building is actually within what the official plan and the zoning bylaw allows for. So this street was contemplated for 6-story buildings. We're building a 6-story building. We're not asking for any relief on side yard setbacks, rear yard setbacks, anything. So the size of the building remains the same as any other building, including our Stage 6 building, which is adjacent to it. The difference here is we would like to build, you're going to call them micro units, but I wouldn't. We'd like to build very efficient living spaces. So there's no dens in this building. These are 460 square foot 1-bedroom units, 320 square foot studio units, 600 and change square foot 2-bedroom units. I'm not saying everyone wants to live in a space this small, but we're trying to create a series of different products in each of our buildings, and this is the next one that we haven't tackled yet, which is efficient spaces, which allows for a user to purchase a unit starting at $199,000, which you can't buy real estate for $199,000 in Waterloo, and it allows a potential tenant to be renting in a new building a studio unit for under $1,000 a month. So we're trying to, by creating more efficient spaces with less wasted space, allow for a more attainable, affordable is not the correct word, but attainable way to live. So the issue with this is because Waterloo's density system is based on a per bedroom basis and not a GFA, if we built to the as-of-right density, we'd be building a 2.5-story building. It wouldn't be economically feasible. So we're asking for the extra density to fill out the box to look like what every building should look like on the street, but to actually create those higher, more efficient and more compact units within the box, which is the building. So that is basically what we're doing with the density bonusing.
Okay. Thank you. Further questions for the delegate? Seeing none, thank you very much, Daryl.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else present here tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Seeing none, if there are no more delegations, this formal public meeting is concluded and the application is now open to council for a motion and debate. Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll look to Madam Clerk for a bit of help, given staff have some amendments and I have some amendments to the Section 37 allocations. Councillor Durrell will not be happy with them, but I'm just curious about how to combine the two, given there's some staff changes as well.
Aren't your changes independent, though?
They are.
Yeah, I think they stand alone.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Henry. I do agree that Councillor Henry's any amendments that he may have would stand alone. Those amendments suggested by staff would be incorporated in the Section 7 recommendations as they stand, correct? Okay.
Yeah. So I'm happy to take those in and then make these alterations. I assume I have to incorporate the 73 wording as well, the Bill 73 wording, clerk. So I will say, having considered all written and oral submissions from the public and stakeholders and considered the professional opinions of planning staff, council approves zoning bylaw amendment Z-17-11 257 to 263 Hemlock Street in accordance with Section 7 recommendations of IPPW 2017-064 as amended for the reasons specified in Section 6 conclusions of the report. Those amendments, in addition to being named, Recommendation 1, which you see on your package as is, Recommendation 2, that Waterloo Council approves zoning bylaw amendment Z-17-11 for the lands identified on map 1 in accordance with section 7 of IPPW 2017-064. Here's the new wording. Subject to section 7A-B being amended by deleting number 1 and 3 in its entirety and replacing number 1 with, quote, the burial of hydro in Northdale, the location of which shall be at the discretion of the city. And in recommendation 3, that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign the section 37 bonusing agreement for Z-17-11 substantially in the form of the draft agreement contained in Appendix E to IPPW 2017-064. The amendment, subject to staff revising the Section 37 bonusing agreement to include the allocation of $250,000 that was originally directed to electric vehicle charging stations and the expansion of the Waterloo Memorial Recreation Complex towards the burial of hydro in Northdale. So lining up 1 with 2. So that's my motion. I'll look for a seconder.
I just make sure I understand what he said.
Well, we'll go to that.
I'm going to speak to it if I get a seconder, because I know that was a lot of words.
Seconded by Councillor Freeman. Let's have some explanation.
Okay, so on rationale.
Yeah. But all of the money is that? Somebody's saying? Okay.
Great.
So I'll take the floor. So this development through Section 37 as proposed, which I have no issue with. I think the design has improved substantially since the informal public meeting. It addresses the street far better, and it responds to staff instructions around a strong podium and a strong address to the street. So I have no problems with that. I think that's helpful, and the new product on the market will provide some greater diversity and the lowest price point I think we've seen in a long time. I wouldn't want to live there, but some people might, particularly if they can actually afford to buy it. I think that's helpful. In terms of the bonusing that this generates at $10,000 a bedroom for 75 additional smaller bedrooms, the proposal from staff was to allocate this $500,000 towards affordable housing anywhere in the city, and then a series of other investments, electric vehicle chargers, anywhere else in the city on lands, and a small contribution to a very sizable recreation center expansion that will come to council in December, a drop in the bucket, really. I note that both of those are almost certainly going to be outside of the neighborhood. And so I point council to page 19 of the packet and 14 of the staff report in terms of comments from our growth management division, quoting the official plan, section 12317, which states that, quote, the positive impacts of the exchange should benefit the surrounding areas experiencing the increased density. I think that's important. I think if the density is being allocated to a development in Northdale, there should be some benefit inside Northdale that people in Northdale can tangibly experience from having that. That's a core principle I think is generally used. And so the reallocation of $250,000 that was originally to go into other projects in other places around the city, back towards something which our streetscape master plan, which council unanimously endorsed, along most likely, Hickory Street, which is the green street, and we're trying to create a green, pedestrian, welcoming environment with those hydro poles in the way. This is a significant contribution towards getting us to the place that we've already approved in terms of the streetscape EA we'd like to get to. And this is a down payment that I think should be a model for a significant portion of any Section 37 dollars generated in the future to benefit the future residents and the current residents of Northdale in terms of achieving the streetscape design. And we still retain $500,000 towards affordable housing contributions, subject to how we're going to divide those across the city in the future. So I think there's a good balance between those. And in terms of the historic allocation, the only thing that I know, the only allocation we've seen from past Section 37s that has remained in the neighborhood, I believe has been some dollars directed towards the Larch Street Woonerf from the block development, but that also included electrical vehicle charging stations, which we have not yet installed. And it includes affordable housing, which went to the Y for their current and perhaps the YWCA for their current and perhaps future projects. And the other dollars from Daryl and his group's firm, all of them have gone towards the Festival Heart in Waterloo, amounting, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000 so far. So I think there has been a balance so far. It's mostly been outside the neighborhood, and it's important for some of the dollars that are generated here to be experienced by the people who live in the neighborhood.
So 1/3 local split, 2/3 social good affordable housing. Okay. Good question. Councillor Whaley.
This is a question to Councillor Henry, trying to understand this. Will the burying of the electrical lines be on this particular property or any other Sage property in Northdale?
I've left it open so that we don't constrain ourselves too much legally for agreements, but in conversations with our engineering department, who I've been working with on Northdale streetscape implementation, you recall what I brought, and others, Hickory Street would be what I would envision to be the street we would do this on. This is not one that this is not the Hemlock property here that's on it. So Sage 1 does abut Hickory Street down near King Street, but I'm not. And then you have to get to, I think, Sage 5 at the very end of Hickory at Leicester, and I think there's another one on the north side, which I can't remember the number of. That's up in that ballpark. So there's a couple at both ends, but primarily these are things along Hickory, for which we've already started burying in terms of duck banks to facilitate future burial in the construction projects that are concluding just now.
Councillor Darrell.
So thank you, Councillor Henry, for explaining it. I just needed, so there's $750,000. Where is that money going? So I get the burial. Is $750,000 going to burying hydro wires?
250 hydro burial, 500 affordable housing.
Okay. So okay.
Go ahead. Yeah, please.
Sorry, through you, Mayor Jaworski. So I think it's important, and I think our staff actually wrote this into their amendment, that we're not even really sure what's happening at the province when it comes to affordable housing, what that looks like. I just think it's really interesting that we're taking money from one developer to give to another developer to build affordable housing. I just think at this point I would like to see that money go into something else, and if it's hydro, if it's parks, like I think that's really important. I mentioned Waterloo Park, but there's other parks that are happening in Northdale. If we're talking about micro lofts where people are in a smaller space, green space becomes extremely important. And I just wonder, putting money aside, $500,000 aside for something that we don't have a plan for, we're not sure what's going on, doesn't make a ton of sense to me. And I would like to see something that, I'd love to see something a little bit more strategic in how we're going to do this, but I also think this is a good opportunity for Northdale, especially with the green spaces coming forward. So,
Well, for sure there's a need for affordable housing as well in our community, but Councillor Henry?
I think on the green space question, I think it's a good one. Green space projects in Northdale are incredibly well funded through both development charge allocations, which is what we've used to start design and construction for the 2 parkettes that Council has purchased and set aside, but also parkline dedication, which is generated by each development in here. That's a substantial line item that we haven't begun to tap. So those are very well-funded initiatives that can only be spent on green spaces. It's outside of the green spaces where we have some funding gaps that otherwise, I'm totally with you. If we weren't well-funded on those, that's where I'd be focused. But because we're well-funded, I'm trying to make sure that we get it to the other places that we're not able to get to. And certainly more than 250 would go a longer way. 250 gets, I understand from engineering, a little bit beyond each block, and there's about 8 blocks along this this segment. That's what I got back from Ron and team late last week.
Was Councillor Whaley, did you have your hand up? No?
Yeah.
I have a point of order for the clerk. So clerk, an amendment is being put forward. If we vote to accept the amendment, do we still have a chance to vote or not vote on the whole report? So there should be 2 votes in my opinion. I want to vote on the amendment, but I don't want it to affect my vote on the approving the development. Yeah. You understand?
For clarification, which amendment are you talking about? We have a staff amendment?
Jeff's amendment.
Councillor Henry's amendment, okay.
So he's putting an amendment on the table. If we approve the amendment, that doesn't mean we're approving the report, correct?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Whaley, the amendment is on the floor as presented. So Council votes on that amendment, and whatever way it goes, if for whatever reason the motion fails, then you can vote on the recommendations as presented originally on the agenda.
I think Councillor Whaley, you're
asking. So we have a seconder for it?
We do, yeah.
So we're going to be voting on the amendment, so I want to be able to speak on the amended approval before I vote.
Yeah, so but we've moved everything all together. So everything will be moving as one. So the
Okay, then can I ask that we, a friendly amendment that we move the recommendations 1 and 2 and remove 3 to send back to staff?
Can we?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, that will be through the mover who moved the amendments to decide if he wants to allow that to be voted on separately.
I'm not sure that makes sense, so because there's sort of lock, stock, and barrel, we're approving it, and then we could be all of a sudden not taking the bonusing. So I'm just...
Could we, Madam Clerk, you're the expert.
My recommendation, I think it would be easier just to vote it in its entirety.
I think so.
And then, depending on the outcome of that vote, then we could go back and
do
council can.
Motion. Okay.
Yep.
Fairness. Okay, Councillor Whaley, back to you.
I'm going to speak to the amended motion then. This is my chance to talk about the bonusing agreement. Because, Daryl and team, it's a really nice design. Nice amenities, looks like a good place to live for the next 50 years. And that's where I get stuck on the 50 years part of it. Because the offer looks good as a one-time offer, $750,000. We've got lots of uses for that money today. But the building is likely to stand for 50 years. And when you take the long view, the offer doesn't really look so good. It kind of works out to about $15 a month for each of the bedrooms over the next 50 years. And, what is the developer going to make on that 10 times, 20 times as much per month over the next 50 years? It's a lot of money. And at what cost to the neighborhood? What cost to the neighborhood? Over 50 years, 75 bedrooms, that's a lot of garbage, that's a lot of toilets flushings, that's a lot of showers, that's Much more traffic, much more policing, much more ambulance and fire services for the 75 bedrooms for over 50 years. That's a lot of municipal infrastructure that is tied into it. And what about the increased density to the people who are going to live in the neighborhood? More traffic for the neighborhood, more crowded conditions in the building, and probably higher rents to pay to make up for the $750,000. So I have two recommendations. First of all, for this nice building, for these nice amenities, for this place that'll be around and that you'll be proud of owning for the next 50 years, we need to go back to the bargaining table and get a real better deal for the bonusing. I think we're selling ourselves so short. And further, that when we have future bonusing negotiations, that we take a longer view than this one-time hit that gives us some money today, but leaves the citizens and the residents of the neighborhood short for the next 50 years.
Further comments from council on this motion? Councilor Durrell.
Actually, I'm going to not vote for this, but not for the reasons that Councillor Whaley just had. I actually think that I understand the bonusing process. It makes sense to me. I think the developer pays taxes. That's how it lasts for the next 50 years. I think it's a nice design. I want to see this building built. What I have a problem with is how the staff and the developer have come up with what they're deciding to put together, and obviously the local councillor wasn't even just part of this project because he's amending it today. So what I would be interested in doing is having that the mayor and council be authorized to sign Section 37 for $750,000, and then I'd like to have that brought back so the building continues to move forward, but that there's a discussion around what that $750,000 looks like. That's what I would like to see. So I guess, Councillor Henry, I'm not opposed to burying hydro lines. I think it's a good idea, but I'd like to see a little bit more thought about where that's going to go, and anyway, yeah.
So we have a motion on the table that is ready to be voted on, notwithstanding the suggestions listed herein. Councillor Freeman has some commentary.
Well, I just want to understand whether we can do what Councillor Durrell has suggested, which is to approve this and then determine the allocation of the bonusing dollars down the road. I just didn't know if we can do that or if it has to be all done at the same time.
I see Mr. Rapp has his hand up. Let's see what he has to say.
Certainly through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Freeman. I believe it's possible that it would be a collection of the funds under Section 37, and that the funds be used by council from the list of approved criteria in the official plan, because there is contained within the official plan, there's a list of items or classes of items that can be considered for bonusing, the use of bonusing funds. So that can occur. We would just have to work with the clerk on the modification of ultimately the resolution and make sure it all made sense, but it could occur. But you have staff's recommendation in front of you.
So just following through on that, would we be able to do a legal agreement not knowing what the money is actually being used for?
With all bonusing developments, we do not bring the bylaw forward until the agreement is in place. So there would be a delay, but the formal public hearing would be closed. The decision of council on the land use and the conditions would be set, but the implementation, which is that agreement, we would want that agreement in place saying exactly how the funds were to be utilized in conformity with the official plan prior to us bringing the actual implementing zoning bylaw to council to pass. Mm-hmm. That's how we typically do it.
What I also heard from you is the fact that staff's recommendation on how to use the $750,000, we have that today.
That's correct, staff's
So we won't be
recommendation.
getting another version of it or anything like that. We have it as it is today of what the staff recommended, so the people who are going to make the decision on using 750 are sitting at this table. So we're here today with all the information that we have, and so if we want to debate it further, I think we should debate it further, because there is no further information from staff to be had. Councillor Freeman.
That's all very helpful to me. Like, I personally, I think that Councillor Henry's made a rational request or an amendment that it makes sense to me. That I think it's true. I think a lot of the resources associated with bonusing that have come out of Northdale have been allocated elsewhere in the city, and that there has been a consistent conversation around burying hydro. We certainly did that at 155 Caroline Street, prioritized that as a council, so I don't know why it was important to us to do at Caroline and Allen, and it's less important for us to do here at Hickory. It makes sense to me to do it. And then the other resources being set aside for affordable housing, I think is good. It's a good idea, because we've been looking for ways as a council to find financial resources that we can allocate towards that, recognizing that it's not really within our bailiwick to fund it, but we get requests, and so having resources available for that makes good sense to me. And so I'm looking in the OP right now to try to find the list of what we could use as bonusing ideas, and I think that at the end of all things, we're probably going to come back to where we are right now. So I'm willing to support the amended information that the Councillor Henry's brought forward. And in addition to that, with regard to the dollar amount, I think, I can agree with Councillor Whaley on the value of that bonusing. I'm not really sure that tonight's the night to have that conversation, from the perspective that there have been a series of other projects that we've allocated this similar number to in past months and maybe the past year. And so I think it's really tough to reset the bar on that right now, but I think that if that's something we think we should reset the bar on, then we should do that and direct staff to provide some advice on that going forward before we have another informal asking for a bonus amount of dollars. So I'm willing to support the motion as it's been presented for all of the above reasons.
Okay, and I saw Councillor Burke had his hand up as well.
Yeah, and a similar point of view to me. It's you're in a neighborhood that is undergoing a transformation, and there are costs involved in that, and it makes sense to invest it back into that neighborhood again. I just don't see anywhere where that's not a sensible move. And I agree. I think we might well be selling ourselves short on this game of financial discussions, to not use the other word that I'd like to use. I think we might be selling ourselves short, and it's something that we should look into. But in this particular case, I think I'm with Councillor Henry in we try to keep that investment in the neighborhood from which it emanated.
Further comments? Councillor Durrell?
Yeah, did
Councillor Veith then too.
No, you haven't spoken yet. You go for it. So I guess, so while I'm reading about this affordable housing grant program administered by council, the purpose of this program would be to offer financial support to developments that provide affordable housing and do not already have funding from other levels of government, like the region. And then it says, or for council to use the funding to offset any costs associated with granting development charge exemptions. So we get like one of those a year, is that right?
Depends, yeah, to this year.
And how much money did we have, and where did we go for that money?
50,000 for one, about 100 for the second one, and it came from council contingency.
And they came from council contingency. Yeah. And so, what is our council contingency reserve at these days?
200 is the annual input into it. It probably carries over some, so it's probably say 250-ish.
It's a big.
Mr. Anderson.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I think the year-end balance is about $166,000.
And are we talking about creating another reserve in our reserves for this affordable housing grant? It just feels
I'll look to Mr. Rapp.
like
Certainly through Mayor Jaworski. It's not really, it wouldn't be a reserve, but it would be an account that's set up to be used for affordable housing, absolutely, for that purpose. And council could choose to help pay development charges for development. That would be the most common use, because that's one where council doesn't have the authority to simply waive a development charge, but that's where council can absolutely show their support for affordable units. So the more money that we do have available, perhaps the more developments that we will see come forward and ask for that type and build affordable units.
oh okay. I thank you for the answer, but I think that that if we really want to get serious about affordable housing, that like this is having a couple $100,000 to set aside for development charges for the 1 or 2 projects that come a year. It doesn't make sense. So, I mean, anyway, it just seems to me there's money on the table. We could do some things with it that might actually really benefit Northdale or what have you. $500,000 is pretty exceptional. I'm just going to throw Waterloo Park out there one more time. And, but, you know, and I agree with the $250,000 that's going to hydro. But if we're serious about affordable housing, showing up in a bonus 37 section, you know, at 9 o'clock at night, like if we really want to be serious about affordable housing, let's bring a strategy forward and let's actually figure out what we're going to do instead of putting it in here. That's my comment. I'm done.
Mr. Rapp and then Councillor Veith.
Certainly, just for further clarification or expectation of a work plan item that IPPW has in growth management in the planning area is that we would like to initiate and blow the dust off an older document that was an affordable housing task force that was done a number of years ago, but it was approved in principle, but there was no funding to implement any of the recommendations. So based on the affordable housing concerns that we have in the community, we would like to reinitiate and bring back a number of different items for council's consideration in the future. And again, those items would require funding. So just a clarification of where we're at in our work plan process and what we would like to bring forward sometime, or at least initiate in 2018.
So just for further clarity, the way the wording is today with the affordable housing money, we could use it for those types of projects.
That would be correct, as my memory serves me, some of those recommendations in that old report.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Veith, please.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I don't disagree with Councillor Henry's amendment, but I'd like, can someone just remind me how would we get to this number? I just think $750,000 is not really a lot of money, and
over the past 2 or 3 bonusing ones that we did, and I see Joel creeping up to the table here, we kind of settled in at 10,000. It was lower than a couple of per unit, per bedroom, and it was lower, and then we somehow crept up to 10,000. We've sort of stayed there over the past 18 months or 12 months or something like that. Joel, do you have anything to weigh in on that?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, that's an accurate statement. It was through the Sage 2 development, I believe, that council increased the value from a lower amount up to the $10,000 benchmark. It is at council's prerogative to set the value at what it seems or deems reasonable.
Back to Councillor Freeman's comment about maybe that's something that we could talk about. I just think, I mean, I'm having trouble getting a couple benches for my ward, and we're talking about, you know, these kind of fun extra things that developers are giving us. So anyway, I'll probably support it, but I do.
We'll find out
I
soon.
don't really. Yeah. It's hard. It's difficult for me to.
Well, I think the bonusing
get my head
concept.
around this. Yeah.
The bonusing concept has been a work in progress, and we've come we've come a long ways, honing down what we think we want, what staff can think that we will want here at the table, and working on that. And there's probably room for continuous improvement in that. But I think certainly affordable housing is something that we need in the community, and having benefits in the community or in the local community identified by the ward councillor, I think is a fair, good start. Councillor Henry.
I think I'll close off subject to the mayor's direction from the chair. I appreciate the conversation. Certainly section 37 is one of those that, as the mayor's identified, is a work in progress. Councils in Waterloo have relatively limited experience with using the tool, although that's building and mostly here in the Northdale area, in part because the Northdale planning framework provided some space for exactly this to happen, to help us achieve objectives of the plan that we find a challenge to achieve otherwise. So I think that's what this does here. I apologize for not circulating earlier, because I'd spent late last week, mid to late last week, bumping around departments to try to make sure that I'd had development approvals, growth management, engineering, all the folks that were going to be responsible for these pieces, in line to understand where they were coming from, to understand what would be possible and how far we would get. So I made sure to do the legwork so that we could actually take this and find it for the most productive use. And I think part of the disconnect between what might have come forward from staff as a recommendation and where we are today happened through no fault of, I think, anybody in development approvals or my own, or certainly not the applicant. We've had staff changes to take over the file. Mr. Voscott dropped the file, and as it was nearing the end, and as soon as I saw it, we circled in and had a chat. It was the first thing I did when I saw the report, and so it was written, and we have an opportunity to make some adjustments. In terms of the priorities, I've already mentioned where many of these are, and I think to concerns about where exactly our affordable housing program and support will land, those are good questions. I think it's a good concern, and that's why the amendment that actually came from staff, which sort of folded itself into recommendation 7, was putting a 5-year time window on the affordable housing portion, should there be problems with using it or a different direction from that into other priorities. So that conversation could happen anew. And so I think that's open should the province close the door to us being able to, in fact, do what's here, which is what municipalities have been doing all over the province for years and years and years and years. But going forward, we may not be able to use cash from one location and take it to another location, and they may backstop that, before this application. So we may get stymied or not. So we haven't found out yet because they haven't produced the paper yet to tell us. So I think the flexibility, Councillor Durrell, to moving this around should it prove problematic to us being able to do what Mr. Rapp spoke to is there and is embedded, and I appreciate that. So I hope that alleviates some of those concerns, that we wouldn't end up with dead money in a bad place. I think this gives us the flexibility for a way out, and I agree with the mayor. Affordable housing is a common and continuing concern that I hear in this community, and as finance chair, every time the development charge grant in lieu of charge requests come up, first thing in my head is we have no funding source for that, and we've got to find it somewhere else. And this, at least in the interim, provides us a place to take that from that doesn't rob Peter to pay Paul. It's actually dedicated to that purpose.
Yeah, and I think based on our past decisions of funding the development charges, that this $500,000 will go towards 2, 3, 4, 5 projects, and I think that's a great thing in our community to have 3 or 4 new affordable housing projects come forward. I think that's really the headline here to me, is the fact we've actually doing something, putting money towards affordable housing instead of just finding money here and there to towards it.
On the numbers, based on our proposed development charge bylaw for next year, it would be a little over 80 one-bedroom units or a little over 50 2- or 3-bedroom units in apartment buildings.
Okay. I think we've exhausted the buttons here. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? 2. That passes. Thank you. Next up. This is a formal public meeting to consider zoning bylaw Z17-5, Sifton Properties Limited, 5 West Hill Drive. Any persons who want further notice of this application, including the passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate register in the binder located on desk at the rear of the chambers. Will the clerk please advise council of the method used to give notice of the meeting and the dates notice was given?
Notice was advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle on November 2nd, 2017, and mailed or emailed on October 31st, 2017, to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property, to public agencies, to all persons who signed in or spoke at the informal public meeting held on September 11th, 2017, and to all persons who requested further notice.
Thank you. The Director of Planning will now provide a brief overview of the application. Welcome, Joel.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, members of council, ladies and gentlemen. I have with me Daniel Watchhorn, who is our student planner with the city and co-piloted on this application before council. The application before council, this is a formal public meeting for zone change, or zoning bylaw amendment, I should say, Z1713 for 5 West Hill Drive. To orient council in the city where the property is, it's within the little tiny yellow in the southwest corner of the city. Kind of zooming in a little bit more, you can see the intersections here of Herb Street, Iron Needles, so it's right at the southeast corner of the intersection. It's within Ward 1 and the property is a little bit less than an acre in size, and it's the area identified in blue. Immediately to the south of the property is an 11-story apartment building also constructed by the applicant adjacent to the site. The application is essentially threefold. It is to seek an amendment to the building height from 5.5 meters down to 5 meters. It is to modify the street line build-out requirement adjacent to Iron Needles Boulevard, removing that requirement to provide some design flexibility for the site. And currently a restaurant is permitted on the property, and the request is to add the drive-through component to the restaurant use. With respect to the proposed building reduction, there's a number of commentary statements that are provided within the staff report, which I believe are relatively self-explanatory. With respect to the height reduction, it is minor in nature. The existing buildings at this intersection, all 4 corners, and the proposed building are 1-story buildings, so it's in keeping with the existing built form framework around the intersection. It's in keeping with the node's urban design guidelines as discussed in the report, which essentially looks for low to medium-rise housing or medium-rise built forms in this location, and it meets the intent of the bylaw. With respect to the street line build-out, this request does provide some site plan design flexibility for building placement. It also recognizes the irregular shape of the lot, and staff have no objection to the requested amendment, provided the building is positioned near the northwest corner of the site, and a site-specific recommendation is included in Section 7 to this regard. With respect to the drive-through, as I noted, the restaurant use is currently permitted. The request is to permit the drive-through component. The official plan designates the property convenience commercial, which does allow for drive-through facilities on such lands, provided they're adjacent to or abutting arterial roads. And as noted in the next bullet, the context of this property does abut 2 arterial roads, Iron Needles Boulevard and Herb Street West. The proposed development meets the intent of the city's urban design guidelines as discussed in the report. And those guidelines also recognize the practical need for some auto-oriented retail forms within the node. So again, it does recognize the guidelines, the ability for some drive-through facilities, which we've seen within this node and within the broader area. And those drive-through facilities, in our experience, have not seen any noticeable, observable negative impacts. And finally, the development is subject to the city's site plan control framework, which will ensure that municipal design objectives are secured. And there's been a number of site plan design directives that are included in the recommendation section of the staff report from council to the site plan review committee that address matters that were identified through the review of this zoning amendment. Noting for council at the informal public meeting, a presentation was made and a conceptual drawing was provided. There was a number of comments provided at that informal meeting around this particular concept. In particular, there was a number of potential conflict points, and there was discussion around the pedestrian interface and the active transportation interface. The concept has been revised based on that feedback, so the applicant has taken that information back and has provided a separation between the parking area for the proposed restaurant and the drive-through use, adjusted the site to deal with a number of conflicts, increased the patio area, and slightly oriented the site. So in our view, they've addressed a number of the concerns that were stated at the informal public meeting, and I'm sure Ms. Wiebe will provide some further context on the site plan with respect to some of the design considerations. With respect to the application, staff are in support of the amendment. We believe it's consistent with the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, and the city's official plan. It advances a land use that is suitable for the subject property. It meets the intent of the urban design guidelines, as I noted. There are other drive-through facilities in the area with no observable impacts that we have identified. The proposed restaurant will serve both surrounding residents as well as pass-by traffic. The region has been consulted on this and has no concerns with respect to their road network, which includes both Ira Needles and Herb Street. The site plan concept has been refined to minimize conflict points, as I've noted, and there's tailored zoning which is reasonable and will allow for orderly development on the property. So we're recommending that the zoning amendment for 5 West Hill Drive be approved in accordance with Section 7 of Staff Report IPPW 2017-068. And there are, as I noted, recommendations with directions to the City Site Plan Review Committee. As I noted, the staff report before Council, I believe, is fairly straightforward. But if you do have questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Thank you, Joel. Questions from Council. Councillor Burke first.
You mentioned that there are other drive-throughs in the area in that report. No. Do those drive-throughs enter or exit off the main roads?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Burke. Directly, to my knowledge, no. They are within sites that are larger development sites, but have similar characteristics. So, for example, on the kitty corner to this property, the Canadian Tire Plaza, the accesses to that development, which do contain a number of drive-throughs, also have restricted accesses near the intersection. So the right-in, right-out movements very similar to this site.
But none of them are drive-throughs that are directly coming in off the main road and then directly heading off onto the main road. They're all contained inside plaza configurations, right?
That is correct. The closest thing I would suggest would be the Starbucks, which does, at the end of the Starbucks drive-through, have an immediate exit out onto Ira Needles or Herbsville Road, depending on where you classify it.
No, it's not a direct exit. You have to go around, then come back out, and then turn right. So it's not a direct exit out onto either one of those roads. It just seems to me that there's this list of drive-throughs that are in the area that aren't really relevant to the one that's being proposed here. There is a world of difference between a Tim Hortons drive-through and a Starbucks drive-through. Am I right?
Certainly in terms of your characterization that the other drive-throughs are designed at commercial facilities that are part of a larger commercial development, that's an accurate statement.
And what I don't understand about the design is as you come down Herb Street towards Waterloo, then you're letting people turn right just past a roundabout, which is, admittedly, your report's right in terms of traffic. There are certain times of the day that it's much busier than others. But at those times of the day, why are we giving people the opportunity to stop and say, oh, I desperately need a coffee? It just seems like an odd place to me.
I'm not sure how to directly respond to that question. With respect to the drive-through, the intersections to the site have been separated to the extent possible with respect to the intersection. So I'm just trying to bring my my mouse up here. The intersections are separated to the extent possible. So there's an intersection off of Herb, there's an intersection here off of Ira Needles. The drive-through is centrally located within the property. So similar to the other drive-throughs, it's contained within the property. The drive-through is not directly exiting out onto those particular roads. It's part of the larger development, but it's been centered in this location for some design efficiencies, but it does provide some access and queuing potential as vehicles exit either the drive-through or the parking area to exit out and turn either direction with respect to Herb Street and do a left, a right out. Or if they want to go, for example, southbound, they would exit off Iron Needles, go up around the roundabout and back down to the south. So the access to the roundabout provides the full turning movements in terms of directions, which is similar to the Canadian Tire Plaza. If you think of the entrances that go into the Canadian Tire, the two nearest entrances, both on Iron Needles and Herb Street, nearest the intersection, both are restricted right in, right out entry points with center medians to control those right in, right out movements. So again, the region has reviewed this and placed the turning movement restrictions similar to the adjacent or kitty corner commercial plazas that exist. But there has been some design consideration, I would say, to try and not have the drive-through exit directly out onto these roads, but be entered into and exited from more within the site.
Thank you,
Joel. Councillor Veith, please.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thanks, Joel. So if you're coming into this site, can you get to any of the other properties to that property?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Veith. So there is an entrance off of Herb Street, which is a right in, right out. There's an entrance off of Iron Needles, which is a right in, right out. And there's also another access point from West Hill Drive in through the site. So there's 3 points of access to this particular property, and it can be accessed from all directions using the roundabout, which is the intent and purpose of the roundabout and why there's controlled accesses with center medians.
Right. So, but people that are going to that property, the existing 11-story building, for example, can get there this way as well, through these.
That's correct. So this access is a joint access that would both serve this existing development to the south of the proposed or the subject lands, and this site is also accessed from West Hill Drive. So if you reside, for example, in an 11-story apartment building, you can access it from Iron Needles Boulevard or from West Hill Drive as well.
Right, and then you can, if you can get on off of Westvale Drive as well, and you can go out. You can go right through the property out to Herb and turn right on Herb, correct?
Correct. In theory, if you resided at this particular apartment building, you could work your way through the site and exit out if you chose to do so.
Seeing no further questions, I have one. This is, okay, Councillor Freeman.
Okay, so my question actually relates to the balance of this lot. So the zoning for this whole lot is MR12, and this parcel is being severed off at 0.378 hectares, leaving another hectare of land that's zoned multi-residential 12. Under the current zoning, that would allow for 200 units mixed 1 and 2 bedrooms. That could be a tremendous number of citizens residing immediately next door to this property. And my understanding is that a proposal has already been presented to those folks that live in the residential units here. So what I'm trying to get at here is how many people, pedestrians, are we looking at on this parcel of land potentially? Because under the new zoning, it's zone MRU 40. So the density of that would be what? 600 bedrooms per hectare? So there could be 500 bedrooms. 500 bedrooms. 200 units or 500 bedrooms immediately next door?
Through your Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Freeman, the subject property, the property basically here in green, is zone MXC, so it's mixed use commercial. That property does allow residential on it. Are we speaking to the property immediately to the south?
No.
Or the property to the east?
Yeah, east.
Yeah, so that property is an independent property that is accessed from West Hill Drive. It is a property that is undeveloped at this point in time, although we have received development applications, and those will be proceeding to council shortly. I don't, off the top of my head, know what the proposed density of the suggested development is at this time. Sorry.
Thank you. And my question was just on the entryways onto the regional roads. That was something that was, this is the property where those were given by right to the landowner from the region?
In response to your question, Mayor Jaworski, that's correct. This access is constructed and it was negotiated as part of the region's Iron Needles Boulevard construction and the roundabout construction. So this intersection exists. Sorry, just trying to get the most to work here. This intersection is not constructed, but it was negotiated through the region and has been accepted. So the location of it and the turning restrictions that are applied to that intersection have already been previously negotiated out with the region.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much, Joel. Registered delegations. First up is Carol Wiebe. Welcome, Carol.
Good evening, Mayor Jaworski, members of council. I'm here this evening on behalf of Sifton Properties, who are the owners of 5 West Hill Drive, which is subject of this application. Mr. Mark Sinden from Sifton Properties is also here this evening with me. We have reviewed the staff report that has been presented to you and also was included in your council package. And we wish to indicate our support for the recommendations included in section 7 of that report. As Mr. Cotter noted, the staff have reviewed and evaluated the application, and they have set out the planning rationale and justification in support of this rezoning, and have concluded that the application should be approved as it is consistent with provincial policy and conforms with the city's official plan. Further, the report concludes that the proposed development meets the intent of the Clare Hills West Hill mixed-use node design guidelines and will serve the needs of both nearby residents and pass-by traffic. Staff also noted that there are a number of drive-through uses in proximity to the site and that there have been no identified issues or concerns with the operation of these drive-through uses. And I won't assume, but I think most of the councillors have driven up and down the entire corridor, and certainly if you go further south into the neighboring municipalities, there are also additional drive-throughs beyond what staff pointed out in the report. And really, as I mentioned in the informal, the drive-throughs have located along the Iron Needles corridor for the very reason that that corridor handles high volumes of traffic. And so drive-through uses tend to locate where the customer base is. And so drive-throughs are going to locate where you have the high volumes of traffic. They're not going to go to areas where you don't already have the volumes of traffic to meet the demand. And I think I can also say that not everybody in this council chamber necessarily uses drive-throughs or maybe supports drive-throughs, but for the people that do rely on them, they appreciate the convenience of having them along those corridors that they travel up and down on a daily basis. And that's why the policies in the official plan direct drive-through uses along major arterial roads. And this site meets those locational criteria. And having said that, I think there's really 2 important questions that council needs to ask, and this is what I've asked. Is this site appropriate for the use that's being requested, and that being the drive-through, because we know that the restaurant use is already permitted. So is this an appropriate location for a drive-through? And the second question is, can the site adequately accommodate that use? And as you read in the staff report, there are a number of evaluation criteria that had to be assessed in terms of the appropriateness of this location. And as I also noted, given the high volumes of traffic, this use is not going to necessarily attract additional traffic. It's going to accommodate the bypass traffic that's already using urban Iron Needles. The second issue in terms of the site, and I have a plan up here. I think I can zoom down a little bit. Well, actually, how do I pull it down? Yeah, here we go. We've actually taken the concept plan from what Mr. Cotter showed you, and we've actually taken it to the next stage to a preliminary landscape. So you can see, overall, this site, we've increased the amount of landscape area from what was presented at the informal. And you can see that this is the driveway that's in place, and there are reciprocal rights-of-ways between the two properties. This is 7 West Hill, this is 5. So the traffic coming in, traveling north, would come in here, would go along this driveway, and then would turn and go through. The city's criteria for drive-throughs recommend that a minimum of 12 to 13 stacking spaces be accommodated in drive-through. This one currently proposes 17 from the point that you actually enter the drive-through, and then of course there is some additional stacking in this driveway and also in here. But the point being that I didn't want to do that, my apologies. We've tried to, where we have the existing landscape, significantly enhance the landscape here. This would help to reduce any headlight glare. Again, we're getting into a little bit of site plan and we're at the rezoning stage, but there is sufficient space within the site to adequately accommodate the drive-through, as Mr. Cotter said, rather than exiting through the parking lot and having the potential additional conflicts between people getting in and out of their cars. The drive-through lane actually bent here and goes back so that there is a complete separation of the vehicles in the drive-through from people that are using the parking stall. And the drive-through locations here and here are going to remain whether or not the drive-through use is part of the site development or not. We've maintained the building up near the corner. We've enlarged the patio area. We've actually pushed the patio a little bit further off to the side. It was predominantly closer to the corner. We've also improved the access from this area into the drive-through and again, or into the patio. So I'm venturing in a little bit into site plan, but I think the important point that we want to make is that we've provided a clear, direct path for pedestrians coming from this direction and also coming from this. So the pedestrian movements to get to the restaurant with or without the drive-through are not going to change. There is going to be this point of access across this driveway. There will also be this crossing of that, I've done it again, my apologies. There is also going to be this pedestrian crossing here. Those sidewalks and the pedestrian movement are going to be the same with or without the drive-through. But even with the addition of the drive-through, there is still, I think you can see, a fair bit of landscaping around the perimeter of the site and also breaking up some of this pavement area from here and here. So we've tried to illustrate that a little bit more clearly, that the intent is to provide a well-landscaped street, put the building up near the corner. So it really speaks to, can the site adequately accommodate the use that's being proposed as part of that zone change, and that is the drive-through. And I think the two questions, this is an appropriate location, and can the site adequately accommodate the use? In my opinion, the answer is yes to both of those questions. And as I said, we've also, I think one of the other comments that came out at the informal public meeting was the amount of parking. So we have reduced the parking. There was 36 parking spaces. We're now proposing 28 parking spaces. And again, just given the amount of traffic in that area, we want to make sure that there is still additional on-site parking for those that want to drive, get out of their car, and go to the restaurant. So again, it's not part of the zoning amendment per se, but it does illustrate to council that the site is appropriate for the proposed use. So again, I don't have anything further to say. I think the staff report adequately reviewed the merits of the application and has recommended approval, and we concur with that recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Questions from council? Seeing Councillor Durrell. There we go.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thank you for your report. I guess as the Uptown councillor, when I see a corner like this and I see it zoned for medium density and I see a single-story drive-through, I think, what a waste of space, right? Maybe everybody feels that way. I mean, why not, like, this is a feature corner, and he owns it, so, or the Sifton owns this, so I'm just curious why, when you have an opportunity to develop something on that corner, that it didn't happen.
I guess the simple answer is that and I mentioned this at the informal, the only inquiry that they have received to date on this property has been for various forms of drive-through uses. And it is primarily because of the visibility and the accessibility of that site. That has been, as I said at the beginning of my comments, this is a major corridor, and it is attractive to those businesses that rely on pass-by traffic.
Further questions from council? Seeing none. Thank you, Carol. I see no other registered delegations. Is there anyone else present here tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Seeing none. If there are no more delegations, this formal public meeting is concluded and the application is now open to council for a motion and debate. Who wants to go first? Councillor Freeman.
Well, I'm going to say that having considered all written and oral submissions from the public and stakeholders and considered the professional opinions of planning staff, council denies zoning bylaw application Z 1713 for the following reasons. The City of Waterloo urban design guidelines, and I'm trying to find them here because I have to give credence to this decline. Our urban design guidelines recommend a city that is sustainable and supports the vision of our city to be a walkable, here it is, that we provide effective design guidelines, establish priorities, promote urban design awareness, promote creativity and innovation, respond to emerging trends and patterns, and clarify design expectations. This design does not meet with my expectations. When I look at this design, all I see is asphalt. And what I'm really struggling with here is the notion that this property cannot be successful as a restaurant without a drive-through, because we're talking an 11-story building to the one side of it, beyond that another 6-story or whatever it is, and then to the east of it there's 1.43 hectares of land that's zoned currently MR12, which allows a density of 286 bedrooms. And under the future zoning, it's RMU 40, which would allow up to 500 bedrooms per hectare, or 715 bedrooms potential on that property. That's a lot of people that can walk to this restaurant, notwithstanding all the other folks that can access this property by means other than a vehicle. And it can be accessed by a vehicle, but you don't have to stage 18 cars in a drive-through. And my thing is where do we cut bait on this? We've got a policy that says we're contrary to idle emissions. We've got a road that have been huge investments in active transportation. And we've got a property that is surrounded by hundreds of residents. And why in the world do we want to complicate an already complicated intersection with a raft of traffic attempting to get in and out of an 18 stacking lane drive-through on a property that is primarily asphalt? I don't know. It doesn't work for me. I cannot support this application. I'm hopeful there's a seconder for this motion, and if the clerk needs more solid rationale for my disagreeing with the staff report, I'll do my best to put it together.
But we will need that today. Yes. Okay. Councillor V seconded it. Discussion. Councillor Burke.
I agree with everything Councillor Freeman says, and in addition to that, there's a part of me that's really bothered by bringing up other drive-throughs that aren't really relevant to the discussion because it's completely different. If this was installed inside the boardwalk development with drive-throughs operating the way they do there, absolutely no problem with it. But that's not the case. It is right at a major intersection, an area that is extremely busy and has gone through plenty of traffic changes over the past 2 or 3 years and is only growing in its busyness. It just makes no sense to me to be slowing people down to turn into this place and then slowing other people down as they turn out. I think, again, along with Councillor Freeman, that it would do fabulously well without a drive-through in that location. There are a lot of people there. I just think it makes no sense to put those entrances and exits for a drive-through at that particular corner. It's just, it's not related to any other development that's there. Kitty Corner across the street, the Canadian Tire Plaza, it's completely different. It's a completely different animal. And so there's, I don't know what the wording is either, but I'm with Councillor Freeman on that. I can't support this.
Further discussion from council. Councillor Whaley.
Well, it's interesting that that if you approve of the restaurant, but you don't want the drive-through, they still have to have entrances and exits to get to the restaurant without a drive-through. So you still get the same entrances and exits. Just the drive-through seems to be the issue, and I'm just stuck on that issue. You're opposed to it because of the entrances and exits, but you have to have them for anything that goes in there anyway.
Well, it's a different situation with drive-throughs. It attracts, I think, a higher level of traffic, and I can see the difficulties in it being backed up at certain times. I can certainly envision that stacking more than 18 cars there at 8:30 in the morning or something. I know that we probably can't get rid of the restaurant because that's just, but it just seems to me that we're adding more trouble or more potential trouble by having the drive-through there.
Further commentary? Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Mayor. Certainly appreciate the debate, which I think was anticipated by the applicant and staff, given the informal comments and some of the other comments folks have received. That being said, I can't support the motion on the floor. I don't view it as defensible, given our policy framework, particularly to rely on an interpretation of our urban design guidelines over very clear criteria of our official plan. I have a feeling I know what that's going to look like in argument before the municipal board, as it should, because there's a hierarchy and an expectation. I understand frustrations and objections to drive-through uses, and the applicant's planner spoke to that. I personally am not a fan. To put it mildly, even when it would make sense for me to use a drive-through, I get out. I have to get at least 5 or 6 steps on those rare occasions when I'm driving. But we do have that in the planning framework. We had some debate around the appropriateness of drive-throughs and where, when the previous council approved the official plan back in 2012, the discussion, as I recall it, did not land, and certainly as is reflected, did not land on us removing those policies from the official plan and saying thou shalt not drive through, because of the other concurrent elements of the plan in terms of walkability and sustainability, which I absolutely concur with. We had this debate again in terms of signage and drive-throughs and where those were appropriate and not. And we've had this conversation, but we haven't had it at the appropriate level to say, no, there's drive-throughs on arterial roads aren't it, because there's, as staff have referenced in their report. We have very specific sections and procedures to evaluate the appropriate location of drive-throughs. Staff have done this. I understand that may not make us happy about what that looks like based on the parcel size and some of the other challenges. But I would also note, as I've been doing some measuring in terms of the distance from of the closest entrance here to the roundabout, I see it as from the exit, which I take to be the crosswalk, 63 meters from that eastbound on Herb. The plaza on the southwest of there has an entrance 48 meters in that is a right in, right out that would attract a lot into that plaza given the direction of travel. And there is a Tim's with an even closer entrance positioned at the Highland Road and Ira Needles roundabout, just in our neighbor to the south that is closer than that as well. So there are certainly clear precedents, and I imagine data that will be gathered at a board hearing should council reject this application. I think when we ask to have the responsibility of making planning choices in accordance with our official plan, we should do that, even when it can be challenging. And I also take staff's point on some of the traffic overlaps that we'd expect to see here. They don't overlap with the boardwalk in terms of peak Tim's hours, and they don't overlap with the opening hours of the Costco most of the time. So I don't see the same challenges that I know we hear about, but I don't get a sense that those would be true on the ground. So I concur with staff's recommendations here, notwithstanding my general dislike of drive-throughs.
Further comments before I comment? Throw my 2 cents. Councilor Freeman.
If I could, I'd just like to respond to some of the comments. I appreciate Councillor Henry's conversation, and I think when I look at the OP, and I look at the other policies that we've implemented to surround that, including our transportation demand management policy, it makes clear note to the fact that intensification is coming to the city and that there's a necessity to reduce car trips. And so if we're serious about that, and we're serious about saying that there is a necessity to reduce car trips, then I think we have to look at all aspects of our zoning and our development. And I don't actually think the OP specifically says that on a mixed commercial node that there has to be a drive-through. And so in this particular case, I don't believe that it's contrary to our OP to say no to this. It's already zoned, and that zoning was approved and was at that time in conformance with the OP, which hasn't changed since we did that. And I think that we've got to take a step back and say, look at all the other pieces that we've put in place. We have a pedestrian charter, we have a transportation demand management strategy, and certainly that route is a very huge active transportation route by bus. I can name a few. I'm sure you can name more as a primary GRT user, and I just feel that the entire idea around intensified growth is to encourage people to live closer to work, play, and business. And there's an enormous number of people that are going to live and work surrounding this particular node, notwithstanding the fact that there's been one type of interest in this property to date. It doesn't mean that there wouldn't be in the future. And I think there is a tremendous amount of support to support a council decision that says, no, this is not the right time, place, design for this drive-through. And I realize that we lose Joel at the OMB, but I'm not willing to be afraid of going to the OMB for doing something that I just fundamentally believe in my heart is right. I have a visceral response to this site plan. I wish I didn't, but I do. And it would be a lot easier if I didn't. Admittedly, it would be a lot easier, but when I look through our supporting documentation, I believe there's a tremendous amount of rationale to support a council decision that says no.
Okay, I'm not sure Joel can go to the OMB because he is supportive of the application. Yeah. So in my case, I would like, I am supportive of staff's recommendation. The way I look at it, is it the first place I'd pick for something like this? Not necessarily, but if you look at the facts, the region has given this site the right to go in and out of the roundabout area. The region has considered it and looked at it from a traffic perspective and has no concerns. Regardless of whatever you have as a restaurant there, whether it be drive-through or no drive-through, you're going to have asphalt for parking or asphalt for a drive-through and parking, and this one has, if I read the notes correct, 28 parking spaces, including accessible parking, 17 spaces for stacking, plus additional stacking spaces on the entranceway, so 43 different spots. It is very auto-oriented, we all know that out there, and there's a coffee shop and a gas station right across the road that enters right into the roundabout. And if you think about that, it's entering into the roundabout from the Starbucks. This site, if you're heading northbound on Ira Needles, you actually don't even pass through the roundabout. This actually eases the burden on the roundabout by taking all those cars who are heading into the coffee shop. They actually avoid the roundabout. When they come out, they're not on the roundabout anymore. They're heading, say, eastbound on Herb Street. So believe it or not, it actually eases the burden on the roundabout in that case. We do have to recognize that drive-throughs are good from an accessibility standpoint. There's some people who have mobility challenges, and that's one of the advantages of drive-through. And people with kids. When my kids were young, I used that a lot. It's just a lot easier to go through the drive-through. And then finally, from a landscape perspective, that is something that we brought up last time, is how you're going to handle pedestrians. And they came up with a very unique way to handle the pedestrians and to have that specific new walkway and walkway across. So I can't support the motion as it stands. Further comments? Seeing no further comments? Do you need further clarity on the reasoning?
It does not encourage sustainable design. It does not enhance connectivity and interaction of active transportation users. It does not respect the context and promote a sense of place. It does not promote a high standard of urban design. And that I'm doing my best here, that it doesn't facilitate social interaction and promote a sustainable design solution. It reduces negative environmental impacts.
Okay with that. And the person who seconded is okay with it. Okay, so we have a motion that people agree on. I'll call the question. Those in favor of the motion? Those opposed to the motion? Okay, so that's 4-3. So there's room for a new motion. Oh, Councillor Whaley. As printed, which includes reading the... Okay, so I think Councillor Whaley is saying, having considered it all written in oral submission, that's Hemlock Street, what am I doing? Having considered all written and oral submissions from the public and stakeholders and considered the professional opinions of planning staff, Council approves zoning bylaw amendment Z 1713 5 West Hill Drive in accordance with Section 7 recommendations of IPPW 2017-068 for the reasons specified in Section 6 conclusions of the report. Is that what you're... Moved by Councillor Whaley, seconded by Councillor Henry. Discussion on that one?
I don't like it, but I'm not willing to go to the OMB and lose for it. So, yeah.
Thank you. Further commentary? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion? 4 of us. All those opposed? 3 of us. That motion carries. We're actually at the adjournment, but somebody wanted, I think Councillor Durrell had some other new business.
I'm hoping that council will waive notice of motion and walk down the road with me one more time as I take you back to Uptown Waterloo and the fact that we have 2 hours of parking and it's Christmas time or holiday season and everyone deserves to park for 3 hours in Uptown Waterloo for free during the holiday season. Any small budget impact can be picked up by our council contingency. So if would anybody like to second waiving notice of motion?
Sure, let's do that. Councillor Whaley did that. Okay, so waiving notice of motion.
And
you're going to move essentially what you just said.
Yeah.
And I will have
We should vote on waiving motion.
Okay.
Parking.
Okay, waiving notice of motion. All those in favor? Okay, it's all of us.
Parking lots in Uptown go from 2 hours to 3 for the month of December.
Oh, hold on, no. Oh, you're seconding it. Seconding it, Councillor Veith. We'll give it to you this time. Okay, Councillor Veith. Questions?
I can get some more stuff in here. How about free Wi-Fi in Uptown, the whole thing?
Save that for next one.
It's already free.
Question to Mr. Anderson, Mr. Anderson. Question to Mr. Anderson. From an implementation standpoint, now that we have Honk Mobile, is this easy to accomplish, number one? And number two, do we have a ballpark figure of what this what the impact of this is?
Yes, Mayor Jaworski, the Honk Mobile will have to be amended slightly. There is a small implementation charge just to give the 3 hours that's proposed. And then we would blanket the parking lots with some signage updates as well. So there's a little bit of expense associated with it and likely a little bit of lost revenue from Honk Mobile. We estimate probably around $3,000 to $4,000 in total.
And this would apply to the existing lots that are 2 hours, but i.e. not the parkade as an example?
That's my understanding. Just the surface lots, we would not affect the parkade at all.
Okay, so supporting uptown parking for about $3,000. Any further commentary? All those in favor? That's all of us. Thank you. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Durrell, Councillor Whaley, all those in favor? Well, we're adjourned.